thought I was having a heart attack right there in the conference room. Sweat was literally dripping from my forehead onto the mahogany table. My blouse was soaked through, and I could feel my face burning red as the young recruiter stared at me with a mixture of disgust and suspicion. But what happened next wasn't just humiliating, it was about to destroy my family in ways I never imagined possible. "Ma'am, are you on something?" he asked, his voice dripping with judgment as he actually leaned back in his chair like I was contagious. I wanted to explain that it was just menopause, that I was a perfectly capable professional who had simply hit an unfortunate hot flash at the worst possible moment. But before I could even open my mouth, he was already reaching for his phone. "Security? Yeah, we have a situation in conference room B. I need someone up here immediately." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a job interview gone wrong. This wasn't just about some ignorant kid who didn't understand women's health. This was about to become a nightmare that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my own family. Because what I discovered about this recruiter and his connection to my 17-year-old daughter Emma would change our lives forever. Sometimes the most innocent moments reveal the darkest truths. And sometimes fighting for your dignity means fighting for your child's future too. My name is Sarah, and at 49, I never thought I'd be sitting in job interviews again, desperately trying to restart a career I'd put on hold 15 years ago. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. When my husband David died in a car accident 2 years ago, my world completely shattered. We'd been together since college, 23 years of marriage, 2 beautiful daughters, and what I thought was a secure future. David had always been the breadwinner while I focused on raising Emma, now 17, and her older sister Jessica, who's 21 and in her final year at university. I'd been a marketing coordinator before the girls were born, but I'd happily stepped away to be a full-time mom. David always said we were a team. He'd handle the finances, and I'd handle everything else. What I didn't know was how precarious our financial situation had become. David had been struggling with his construction business for the last few years, taking out loans and refinancing our house without telling me. He was trying to protect me, trying to fix everything on his own. When he died, I discovered we were drowning in debt. The life insurance barely covered the funeral costs, and the house was 3 months behind on payments. Suddenly, I found myself a single mother with a teenager still at home, another daughter whose college tuition was due, and no income. The savings account I thought would last us years was actually empty. I had to face the harsh reality that I needed to find work immediately. Not just any work, but well-paying work that could support what was left of our family. The problem was, I'd been out of the workforce for 15 years. Marketing had completely transformed in that time. Social media, digital campaigns, analytics. It was like trying to speak a foreign language. I spent months taking online courses, updating my resume, and applying for positions that paid half of what I used to make. Most companies didn't even respond to my applications. Emma was struggling too. She'd been Daddy's little girl, and losing him had turned her into an angry, rebellious teenager who blamed me for everything. She'd started dating this older guy, Marcus, who was 19 and worked at some tech startup. I didn't like him. There was something arrogant and dismissive about the way he treated both Emma and me. But Emma was head over heels, and any criticism of Marcus led to screaming matches that left us both exhausted. The job interview that changed everything was for a marketing coordinator position at Pinnacle Digital Solutions. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid enough to keep us afloat and had decent benefits. I'd made it through 2 phone screenings and was finally invited for the in-person interview. I'd bought a new blouse with money I couldn't afford to spend, practiced my answers for hours, and felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. The menopause symptoms had been getting worse over the past year. Hot flashes that came out of nowhere, night sweats that left me changing sheets at 3 a.m., and mood swings that made Emma's teenage hormones look stable. My doctor had suggested hormone therapy, but with no insurance and mounting bills, I was trying to manage it naturally with over-the-counter supplements that barely helped. I should have rescheduled the interview when I woke up that morning feeling the familiar tension that usually preceded a bad hot flash day, but I couldn't afford to. This was my 4th interview in 6 months, and I was running out of time. The foreclosure notice had already been served, and Emma's senior year was starting in 2 weeks. I needed this job more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. So I put on my best professional smile, grabbed my portfolio, and headed to what I thought would be a routine interview. I had no idea I was walking into a situation that would expose secrets, destroy relationships, and force me to fight not just for my career, but for my daughter's future. The Pinnacle Digital Solutions office was everything I expected from a trendy tech company. Exposed brick walls, ping-pong tables, and 20-somethings in hoodies typing furiously on MacBooks. I felt ancient walking through their open-concept workspace in my conservative blazer, but I held my head high. I had experience these kids couldn't buy, even if it was from a different era. The receptionist, a girl who couldn't have been older than Emma, directed me to the 3rd floor. "You'll be meeting with Marcus Chen, our head of talent acquisition," she said with a bright smile. "He's super nice. You'll love him." Marcus Chen. The name didn't register immediately, but something about it felt familiar. I brushed off the feeling and focused on my breathing exercises as I rode the elevator up. The hot flash that had been threatening all morning was still lurking, and I could feel the telltale warmth starting to build at the base of my neck. When the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by a young Asian man in his early 20s, impeccably dressed in a slim-fit suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He had the kind of confident swagger that comes from never having been told no in his professional life. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "I'm Marcus Chen. Great to finally meet you in person." That's when it hit me. Marcus. Emma's Marcus. The boyfriend I'd met exactly 3 times, who always seemed to look right through me when I tried to make conversation. The one who made subtle comments about our modest house and asked Emma why her mom didn't work. But surely this couldn't be the same person. What were the odds? "Nice to meet you," I managed, shaking his hand while my mind raced. He showed no signs of recognition, which made me question my own memory. Maybe I was just nervous and seeing connections that weren't there. He led me to a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Can I get you some water?" "Coffee?" he asked, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who held all the power in the room. "Water would be great, thank you," I said, already feeling the heat building. The morning sun was streaming through those massive windows, and the room felt uncomfortably warm. But as we started talking, my suspicions were confirmed. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the specific way he said "interesting" when he was clearly unimpressed, the habit of checking his phone mid-conversation. These were all mannerisms I'd observed during those awkward dinners when Emma brought him home. "So, Sarah," he said, scanning my resume with barely concealed skepticism, "I see you've been out of the workforce for quite some time. 15 years is a significant gap. What makes you think you can jump back into marketing in today's digital landscape?" The question was fair, but his tone was condescending. This was the same tone he used when he'd asked me why I didn't understand Emma's need for independence, or when he'd suggested that maybe I was being overprotective because I didn't have enough going on in my own life. "I've been taking courses in digital marketing, social media strategy, and analytics," I began, but I could feel the heat wave building. My face was starting to flush, and I could feel the first beads of sweat forming on my forehead. "Online courses," he said, not really a question. "And you think that's equivalent to hands-on experience in a fast-paced agency environment?" The hot flash hit me like a freight train. Within seconds, sweat was pouring down my face, my blouse was sticking to my back, and I could feel my carefully applied makeup starting to melt. I tried to maintain my composure, reaching for the water glass with a shaking hand. Marcus's expression shifted from professional skepticism to something much worse, disgust mixed with suspicion. He was looking at me like I was some kind of unstable person who had wandered in off the street. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, but there was no concern in his voice, only judgment. That's when I realized this wasn't just a job interview anymore. This was Emma's boyfriend, the person she was planning to move in with after graduation, looking at a middle-aged woman like she was a pathetic, sweaty mess who didn't deserve to be in the same room as him. And the worst part? He still didn't recognize me as his girlfriend's mother. The sweat was now dripping onto the conference table, and I could see Marcus physically recoil as he watched me struggle. What should have been a moment of understanding, any decent human being would recognize the signs of a medical episode, instead became something much more sinister. "Ma'am, I have to ask," Marcus said, his voice taking on an authoritative tone that made my skin crawl. "Have you taken any medication today? Any substances that might be affecting your behavior?" The accusation hit me like a slap. Excuse me? It's just that this level of perspiration, the shaking, the obvious distress, these are classic signs of drug withdrawal or intoxication. We have a zero-tolerance policy here at Pinnacle, and I need to know if you're under the influence of anything. I stared at him in disbelief. This was Emma's boyfriend, the person she'd been defending for months, telling me I just didn't get him, that he was mature and successful, and everything she wanted in a partner. And here he was, accusing me of being a drug addict because I was experiencing menopause. "I'm not on any drugs," I said firmly, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. "I'm experiencing a hot flash. It's a normal part of menopause that affects millions of women." Marcus's expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked more disgusted. "Right, menopause." He said the word like it was something dirty. "Look, Mrs. Mitchell, was it? I think we both know this isn't going to work out. You're clearly not prepared for the demands of a modern workplace." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It means that if you can't handle a simple interview without having a medical episode, how can we trust you to handle client presentations? High-pressure deadlines? What happens when you're in a meeting with important clients and you start sweating like this?" The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This wasn't just professional rejection. This was personal disgust. And suddenly I understood exactly what Emma saw in him. He was handsome, successful, confident, but he was also cruel, entitled, and completely lacking in empathy. "I think this interview is over," I said, starting to gather my things. "Actually, it's not," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "I need to document this incident for HR purposes. We can't have people coming in here under the influence and potentially creating liability issues." "I told you, I'm not under the influence of anything. That's what they all say," he replied, actually starting to record me with his phone. "State your name and confirm that you're experiencing some kind of medical episode that's affecting your ability to function normally." The humiliation was complete. Here I was, a 49-year-old woman who had raised 2 children, managed a household for 15 years, and was desperately trying to rebuild her life after losing her husband, being treated like a criminal by my own daughter's boyfriend. But the worst part was yet to come. "You know what?" Marcus said, stopping the recording and leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "You remind me of someone. My girlfriend's mom, actually. She's this uptight, controlling woman who can't accept that her daughter is growing up, always trying to interfere in our relationship, always making these passive-aggressive comments about my job and my success." My blood ran cold. She's one of those women who peaked in high school and never did anything with her life except pop out kids and Playhouse. And now that her husband's dead, she's desperately trying to cling to relevance by controlling her daughter's life. He was talking about me, to me, without realizing it. The funny thing is, he continued, clearly enjoying himself, Emma's starting to see it too. How pathetic her mom is. How she's holding Emma back from her real potential. We've been talking about Emma moving in with me after graduation, getting away from all that toxic negativity. I sat there in stunned silence as my daughter's boyfriend, the person she trusted, the person she was planning a future with, systematically destroyed me without even knowing who I was. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about my daughter's future, and I wasn't going to let this cruel, entitled boy destroy it. I sat there for a moment, letting Marcus's words sink in. He was still smirking, clearly pleased with himself for what he thought was a clever observation about some random woman who reminded him of his girlfriend's pathetic mother. The sweat had finally stopped, but my heart was pounding for entirely different reasons now. "That's interesting," I said slowly, my voice steadier than it had been all morning. "Tell me more about this girlfriend of yours." Marcus's eyes lit up. He loved talking about himself and his conquests. "Emma's amazing. 17, but so mature for her age. Beautiful, smart, and once she gets away from her toxic home environment, she's going to be incredible. Her mom is just this bitter widow who can't stand seeing Emma happy." 17, I repeated. "And you're how old?" 22. "I know what you're thinking, but Emma's different. She's not like other high school girls. She's sophisticated, ready for a real relationship with a man who can actually provide for her." The predatory undertone in his voice made my stomach turn. This wasn't love. This was a grown man grooming my teenage daughter, and I'd been too overwhelmed by grief and financial stress to see it clearly. "So you're planning to have this 17-year-old girl move in with you?" I asked. "After she graduates, yeah. I've got a great apartment downtown, and honestly, it'll be good for her to get some distance from her family situation. Her mom is just damaged goods, you know? Dead husband, no job, probably going to lose the house soon. Emma deserves better than that kind of instability." That's when something inside me snapped. Not the hot flash kind of heat, but the cold, calculated fury of a mother protecting her child. I pulled out my phone and opened it to a photo of Emma and me from her birthday last month. I turned the screen toward Marcus. "You mean this Emma?" I asked quietly. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. And for the first time since I'd walked into that conference room, Marcus Chen was speechless. "That's right," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I'm the pathetic, toxic, bitter widow you've been talking about. I'm Emma's mother, and you just spent the last 20 minutes telling me exactly what kind of person you really are." Marcus started stammering. "Mrs. Mitchell, I didn't, this is just a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," I said, standing up and looking down at him. "You accused me of being a drug addict because I was experiencing menopause. You recorded me without my consent. You called me damaged goods and said my daughter deserves better than the instability of living with her grieving mother. I didn't know it was you." "And that makes it better?" I asked. "The fact that you thought it was okay to treat some random woman that way, to mock a widow's struggle to support her children, to brag about manipulating a teenager into moving in with you." Marcus was sweating now, and it wasn't from menopause. "Look, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding here. I love Emma, I really do, and I have nothing but respect for you as her mother." "Stop," I said firmly. "Just stop talking, because here's what's going to happen." I pulled out my own phone and started recording. "State your name and your position at this company," I commanded. What? No, you can't. You just recorded me without my consent during what you claimed was a medical episode. Now it's my turn. State your name and position." "Marcus Chen, Head of Talent Acquisition," he mumbled. "And how old are you, Marcus?" 22. "And you're in a sexual relationship with my 17-year-old daughter, correct?" "She's almost 18, he protested. "So that's a yes. And you just told me on record that you've been planning to have her move in with you after graduation. You also described her as mature for her age and not like other high school girls. Do you understand how that sounds, Marcus?" The panic in his eyes was complete now. "Mrs. Mitchell, please. You're taking this all wrong." "Am I? Because I also have you on record calling me damaged goods and saying Emma deserves better than the instability of living with her grieving mother. I have you mocking a widow's financial struggles and describing how you're systematically isolating my daughter from her family." I stopped recording and leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Here's what's going to happen, Marcus. You're going to end your relationship with my daughter. Today. You're going to tell her that you've realized you're in different places in your lives and that you think she should focus on finishing high school and figuring out what she wants to do with her future. You can't make me—" "Actually, I can. Because if you don't, I'm going to send this recording to your HR department, along with a detailed complaint about how you conduct interviews. I'm also going to send it to Emma, so she can hear exactly how you really feel about her pathetic mother and our toxic home environment. Marcus was completely pale now. Mrs. Mitchell, please. But that's not all, I continued. I'm also going to report your relationship with my minor daughter to the appropriate authorities. Because while 17 might be the age of consent in this state, the power dynamic between a 22-year-old professional and a high school student whose mother you've been systematically undermining is something I'm sure they'll find very interesting. Marcus slumped back in his chair, defeated. So what's it going to be, Marcus? Are you going to do the right thing, or do I need to make some phone calls? Marcus sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, his hands shaking as he processed what had just happened. The confident, arrogant young man who had walked into this room had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who looked genuinely terrified of the consequences of his actions. I never meant for any of this to happen, he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. I really do care about Emma. No, I said firmly. You care about controlling Emma. There's a difference. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked like he was actually listening. Really listening. When you talk about Emma being mature for her age, and not like other high school girls, do you understand what you're really saying? I asked. You're saying that a teenager should be grateful that an adult finds her worthy of attention. You're making her feel special for being chosen by someone older, someone with money and status. Marcus's face crumpled. I never thought about it that way. Of course you didn't. Because you've never been a 17-year-old girl being pursued by an older man. You've never felt the pressure to prove you're mature enough for someone's attention. You've never had to question whether someone loves you for who you are, or because you're young and impressionable. I could see something shifting in his expression, not just fear of consequences, but what looked like genuine realization. Emma talks about you constantly, I continued. But it's not the way a girl talks about someone she's in love with. It's the way someone talks about a person they're desperately trying to impress. She's changed everything about herself to fit what she thinks you want. Her clothes, her interests, even her plans for college. She said she wanted to take a gap year to focus on our relationship, Marcus said quietly. And you believed that was her idea. The question hung in the air. Marcus was staring at his hands, and I could see the exact moment when the reality of what he'd been doing hit him. Oh God, he whispered. I've been manipulating her. It wasn't the response I'd expected. I'd been prepared for more denials, more justifications, but this seemed like genuine horror at his own behavior. The things I said about you, he continued, looking up at me with what appeared to be real remorse. I was trying to isolate her from you. I told myself it was because you were overprotective, but really, I was threatened by how much she loves you. I remained silent, letting him work through this realization. She talks about you all the time, actually. How strong you are, how you're holding everything together after losing her dad, how worried she is about the financial stress you're under. I used that worry against you. I made her feel guilty for living at home, made her think she was a burden. The admission was devastating, but I could see that Marcus was finally understanding the full scope of what he'd done. I need to end this, he said suddenly. Not because you're threatening me, but because this isn't love. What I've been doing to Emma isn't love. No, I agreed. It isn't. But how do I explain this to her without destroying her? She thinks she's in love with me. If I just suddenly break up with her, she's going to blame herself. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of the person Emma thought she was dating. Someone who was actually concerned about her well-being rather than his own interests. You tell her the truth, I said. You tell her that you've realized the age difference creates an unfair power dynamic. You tell her that she deserves to experience her senior year without the pressure of an adult relationship. You tell her that you want her to have the chance to figure out who she is without trying to be what someone else wants her to be. Marcus nodded slowly. And what about everything I said about you? The way I've been turning her against her own mother? You're going to fix that too. You're going to tell her that I'm a strong woman who's doing an incredible job raising her daughters under impossible circumstances. You're going to tell her that any man would be lucky to have a mother-in-law like me someday, when she's actually ready for that kind of relationship. I will, he said, and for the first time, I believed him. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I genuinely didn't understand how harmful my behavior was. The fact that you can see it now gives me hope, I said. For Emma's sake, I hope you mean it. As I gathered my things to leave, Marcus spoke one more time. For what it's worth, Emma was right about one thing. You are incredibly strong, and she's lucky to have you as her mother. It was the first genuine thing he'd said all morning. That evening, I sat Emma down for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of our lives. I didn't tell her about the job interview. That would have felt like a betrayal of the growth I'd witnessed in Marcus. Instead, I waited for her to come to me. She did, 3 hours later, tears streaming down her face. Mom, Marcus broke up with me, she sobbed, collapsing into my arms on the couch. He said he realized the age difference was unfair to me, that I should experience senior year without adult relationship pressure. I don't understand. I thought we were happy. I held her while she cried, stroking her hair the way I had when she was little and had scraped her knee. He also said some things about you, she continued through her tears. He said he'd been wrong about you, that you're incredibly strong and that any man would be lucky to have you as a mother-in-law someday. He said I should be proud of how you're handling everything after Dad died. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Marcus had kept his word. Sweetheart, I said gently, how do you feel about what he said? Not about the breakup, but about me. Emma pulled back and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. I feel terrible, Mom. I've been so angry at you for everything. For Dad dying, for us having money problems, for not understanding my relationship with Marcus. But you've been trying so hard to keep everything together, and I've just been making it harder. You're 17 and you lost your father, I said firmly. You're allowed to be angry, you're allowed to grieve, and you're allowed to make mistakes. But I was so mean to you, and I was ready to move in with Marcus right after graduation. I was going to leave you alone in this house with all these problems. Emma, listen to me. You are not responsible for fixing my problems. You're not responsible for taking care of me. Your job is to be 17, to figure out who you are, to make plans for your future. My job is to support you while you do that. We talked until nearly midnight. Emma told me about the pressure she'd felt to be mature enough for Marcus, how she'd been changing herself to fit what she thought he wanted. I told her about my own struggles with dating her father in college, how I'd almost lost myself trying to be the cool girlfriend who never needed anything. Mom, she said as we were finally heading to bed, what happened with your job interview today? You never told me how it went. I smiled. It didn't work out, but I think that's exactly how it was supposed to be. The next morning, I found an email from Marcus in my inbox. It was brief but sincere. Mrs. Mitchell, I wanted you to know that I spoke with Emma last night and ended our relationship. I also spoke with my supervisor about my conduct during yesterday's interview. I've resigned from my position at Pinnacle Digital Solutions, effective immediately. I realize I have a lot of growing up to do before I'm ready for any kind of serious relationship. Thank you for opening my eyes to the harm I was causing. I hope someday Emma can forgive me, and that you can too. Marcus. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Pinnacle's CEO. Apparently Marcus had filed a detailed report about his inappropriate conduct during my interview before he resigned. They wanted to offer me the position, along with a formal apology and a salary that was 20% higher than originally posted. I accepted. 6 months later, Emma and I are closer than we've ever been. She's thriving in her senior year, has been accepted to 3 excellent universities, and is dating a sweet boy her own age who treats both of us with respect. She's also become my biggest supporter as I've rebuilt my career, often helping me with social media strategies that her generation understands intuitively. The experience taught me that sometimes our worst moments can become our greatest strengths. That hot flash in the conference room wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the catalyst that helped me save my daughter from a relationship that could have damaged her for years. To anyone reading this who's struggling with major life changes, whether it's menopause, career transitions, or protecting your children from harmful relationships, trust your instincts. Your experience matters. Your wisdom has value. And sometimes the moments when you feel most vulnerable are actually when you're most powerful. Have you ever had a moment when something embarrassing led to an important revelation? Have you ever had to protect someone you love from a relationship that seemed perfect on the surface? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others recognize similar situations in their own lives.